Welcome to part 8 of taking a finished drawing to a full color rendering. In this lesson we're going to address two elements in this painting. The first is our hero soldier here in the midground, and then the ground plane that he's going to be running on. So my first task here is to trace him using our lasso tool. He's got a cool little backpack. Go around his helmet here. Come around the body. And so this character is pretty small on screen, but that doesn't mean he loses his power to attract the eye. That's going to be done with his values. So he's going to have a very distinct and bold contrast between his shadow layers and his brightest highlights. That's really going to pull our eye to him. So he's traced here. I'll flip off my drawing. Layer form. And because everything is predominantly cool, I want to make him warm. So it's a little too bright, but I'll bring it down to about there. Now I'll take my bristle brush and kind of make things look a little more smooth as far as the silhouette goes. Now he's not man-made, he's not like the robot, so I want to make him a little bit smoother. Right about in there. I think that looks good, so I'm going to make a new layer and begin doing his shadow colors, his shadow values. And he's basically being rim lit by that focal point light. The parts of him that are going to catch the most light are going to be the back of his head, the tops of the backpack, maybe the upper portion of the top of his thigh, of the leg that's leaning forward, and maybe some of his foot. I think this shadow could go a little bit darker, so I darken it and resample the color. Begin painting with that. There we go. And overall, I think I'm just going to grab him and kind of tilt him forward to give him a little more forward momentum. There we go. My next layer is going to be my brightest highlights. So I chose a more yellowy layer to transition into. And again, these are the areas of the soldier that are receiving the most light. It's good to zoom out every now and then, make sure that things look good even at a thumbnail level. The general rule is that if something looks good as a thumbnail, it's going to look great when it's blown up. Kind of like we were talking about with value studies. You know, if something looks good in the value study, it's going to look great when you take it to color. So with this brightest value, I'm kind of defining the tops of his different body parts. For instance, the forearm and the fist here, top of the thigh here, the shoulder here on the right. So now I think I'm going to go in underneath that highlight layer and really get that mid-tone back in there. I think it's pretty important. It'll define the tops of surfaces that aren't being hit directly by that bright light. Okay, and now I'm going to take the darkest value you have and go even a step further in darkness. I'm going to bring that down even more. Again, we're trying to push the contrast. Use it as a way to push things forward and back. And this guy's suit is kind of an old, what you might see in an old 50s science fiction film. I guess that's really my personal aesthetic. I really enjoy those films and the costume design. It's a very cool period for design in general, and prop making especially. I think one of my favorites is probably the original Outer Limits series. I just love watching that. Just because, I mean, things are pretty simple as far as design goes too. You know, nothing was so complicated. A spaceship was basically a big bullet on 3 legs that shot straight up. Space suits were very bubbly, as were ray guns. Things were very circular or ovular. And I think that made for some really cool design. I like to kind of revive that in some of my work. Great, looks good. It reads from afar, which means it'll definitely read close up. And now our next layer will be to define its visor. And we'll put just a very subtle little specular highlight. There we go. Now our next layer is going to define some detail on him, maybe some patches, separations in the clothing, things that will give the suit some character. Separation in the glove, the boot, maybe a belt. And then probably the strap for this backpack too, to really sell the fact that this guy is carrying that load behind him. I'll go ahead and flatten this. I'm happy with it. And I'll address just a few more spots where I think darker shadow is necessary. Bottom of the backpack here. Basically any surface that's facing directly down and away from the main light source. And I think we can go ahead and cheat a little bit of light on the tip of his foot here. I think it's going to look good. Yeah, I like it. So I'm playing around with color variation in the costume. Seeing how things look if their hues were shifted slightly. Maybe the backpack is darker, and because we just darkened it, we can go back and punch up some of its highlights. And now that I'm looking at the backpack, I think it might be a little too extreme for the character's design. I'm actually going to just kind of hack away at it like this. I think it actually looks way better when it's kind of smaller like that. Extend his elbow out too. And now I've flattened it all. With my levels, I'm going to pull up the highlights a little bit. That's great. I am very happy with that. Just to punch up these glows a little bit, or these highlights, I'm going to add a glow, just like we did with the lights. Because at this point, these highlights are basically at near white. Which means that the particles in the air around them will be illuminated as if they were around an actual light bulb. So I'll give it this sort of treatment. And maybe a stripe going up his pant. Cool, I like that. I'm going to call him done. We'll call this lesson complete as well, and in our next lesson we'll move on to the ground plane and the other two soldiers, and we'll get to addressing the rest of the robots in the background. Now they'll take a lot less detail. They'll really just be silhouettes, but they'll work within the value scheme, and they'll act as framing elements, which is really what they were there for in the first place. And they'll just be nice accents to our main two subjects.